Welcome to the Perspectivalist. Our agenda is to offer a perspective of the world that allows you to think more clearly as a Christian. We want the normativity of scriptures to be the starting point of everything we do. So thanks for joining the conversation. This is season 5, episode 5. I'm your host, Yuri Brito. It's been a couple of weeks since I've had an episode come out from the Perspectivalist. I've been updating our readers on the Substack. I encourage you to take a look at it. It'll be in the show notes afterwards. But I have had several friends over the years whom I see maybe once or twice a year. And when we gather, it's as if we just saw each other yesterday. Chase Davis is one of those guys. He's a pastor of the Well Church in Denver, Colorado, I believe. And he's been there for quite some time. He's got a great story. Which you can go back in the archives and hear our conversation, his own story. Chase, I wanted to hear just very quickly before we delve into our main subject on the latest brouhaha on Acts 29. If you give us just a little update, and you can follow some of this on Chase's Twitter account, but give me a little update to our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, we're in Boulder, Colorado. We like to differentiate ourselves from Denver. Boulder is the Ephesus, and Denver is where we send from the university. They send their disciples to the rest of the state here in Boulder, and Denver is one of those places with
Gotcha.
Pervasively secular, but that's why we're here. And then I think this is the first time I've seen you without a collar on. I didn't know you sported polos. So I'm very impressed that you can rock a polo like this, Yuri. So that's great.
Listen, there are benefits to being PMOC. You can be all things to all people. I want to make sure that my Colorado audience will relate to me.
That's great. Well, with Acts 29, it's a weird position to be in. I'm a pastor. Obviously, I have a podcast and other stuff too, but I have kept people up to date a little bit with what's going on, just from people I hear about from leadership in the network, current churches in the network, different numbers in the network. And so they had a recent conference in Irving, Texas, near Dallas, and they had their national conference. They brought in John Piper, same conference that they had women teaching pastors at. So they were actively teaching, bringing in women to teach pastors on how to raise up women leaders, how to grow in your self-awareness as a pastor, and women were teaching these sessions. And we could, you could debate that. I wouldn't do that, but you could debate that. But it's just ironic they're having John Piper, the grandfather of complementarianism, come in and do that. And what had happened at the conference was everybody's kind of wrapping up this season of what they used to call kind of covenant renewal. Now it's like partnership renewal. And the number that was going around, multiple people were telling me that were at the conference, was 220. Only 220 churches have re-upped in the US to be part of Acts 29. That would be, if that number were to hold, a 57% decline from last year in terms of the number of US churches in Acts 29.
Okay, let me ask you a question. At
Yeah.
its height, let's say the Driscoll days, what was the number in the Acts 29?
Well, yeah, it's always hard with the numbers in Acts 29 because honestly, even under the Driscoll days, they weren't even that great at reporting numbers. So like they didn't have a good database. Like when Driscoll got removed, they
Yeah.
called our church, we had been the network for 4 years, and they said, "Hey, we're just checking in. Are you guys members of our network?" And we're like, "What do you? We've given money, yes." And so
Sounds like baptismal records in the Southern Baptist Church.
it does. It does. So, what they reported at their height was around 700 to 800 churches globally. I think at the height in the US, it was around 550, 600 churches. And so now that if they're at 220, which that number has received pushback from, leaders, they sent out a mass email to their constituents and said, no, Chase is wrong. They didn't name me, of course, but they said, no, it's 367 that have renewed. And it's like, okay, well, if it's 367, that's still a 22% decline in 12 months. That's a significant decline. I didn't put up the number, to just like gossip or slander. I put up the number because that's what I'm hearing. And now my suspicion is they're probably not ever going to report accurately. Their website is woefully out of date. And so yeah, you're seeing an exodus, no matter what number it is. You're seeing people run for the doors, employees jump the ship. You're seeing a lot of employees that were Acts 29 now signing on with NAM, with the SBC. If you look at the NAM kind of pictures they're putting up there, I'm like, every one of those people was part of Acts 29. And so it's like they got a golden parachute there. And so, yeah, that's kind of the latest with Acts 29.
That's very helpful, Chase. I appreciate that. The decline, of course, is a sign of the times. You probably read also about the United Methodist Church that has
Yeah.
swallowed by its own depravity, and they are very much like the Israelites when Moses came down, rejoicing in their version of their golden calf. And that's an interesting sort of pattern overall. If just for our listeners who may be new to it, what do you attribute this decline? Do you think in the United Methodist Church is a bit clearer because you have their sexual ethics, of course, has gone farther down, maybe even beyond Hades itself. But what do you think about Acts 29?
Yeah, I was just talking with a pastor this morning who's still part of an Acts 29 church. And I think, the general consensus from those who have left, from those who are seeing this stuff, not only Acts 29 is just one small piece of the pie in evangelicalism in America and globally, but for so long we've put missiology and how we do mission at the forefront as if that's the grid through which we process theology and worship and liturgy and life together and community, all that stuff. And so when missiology becomes the driving force. And this is what you'll see in church plant brochures too. You'll see that stat from a sociologist that, the most effective way to reach lost people is through planting new churches. I think every church planter puts that in his brochure, and whether that's true or not, but that's kind of the lens. And when you are thinking of worship and Lord's Day worship primarily through the lens of saving souls and seeking the lost, then it will lead to a series of decisions about what you talk about, what you don't talk about, and different compromises you're willing to make. Where instead, if you were to say Lord's Day worship has certain functions and roles and duties as pastors, we have the responsibility to preach the word on these matters to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. If new people come, they're welcome to hear the gospel, to hear the full counsel of God. That will be a different approach. And so I think the American church, in a lot of ways, has been captured by this kind of marketing pragmatism missiology. And there's all sorts of thinkers you could attribute that to out there, like Ed Stetzer would be a great example. But I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, obviously you see this hyper pietism sort of conquering a lot of these conversations. You and I had this conversation about Matt Chandler and some things that happened in the past. The pietism of these churches, of course, keeps their world deeply internalized, and it allows them a little bit of an escape from dealing with the ethical issues of the day. And I think that has also led to a decline. And again, a lot of these conversations are conversations we've had over the years. But when you have issues like COVID, and if you have a church that is deeply internalized in their concerns, when COVID comes along, it forces you to speak about external issues. And what has happened is that you have atrophied, you have lost that capability because you've trained yourself in the liturgy of internalization. So you don't know how to react, which means your only reaction will be to simply say, "Thank you, thus saith the Lord, I will obey the state," and treat it as a God itself.
Right.
All right. So one of the things that has transpired yesterday in this great country of ours was the Antisemitism Awareness Act that passed by 320 to 91. And you and I have been pastors for a long time. If this was an ecclesiastical decision, we would say, wow, this is undoubtedly a majority. This is not just merely a leftist issue or a right-wing issue. There is certainly a bipartisan interest in passing something like an Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. If you would be able to just sort of enlighten a little bit of our listeners who may be unaware of this here, give us a little synopsis of what this bill, which has initially passed before it goes to the Senate, what does it entail, Chase?
Yeah, so what they've released and what we've seen is, there's various components of how they're defining this concept anti-Semitism. This is all in the wake, of course, of these massive uprisings, which just remind me so much of BLM. It's the same neo-Marxist philosophy driving these campus. They're not even protests; they're encampments, riots, this kind of thing. And so they're passing this bill. It entails, you're going to be guilty of a crime if you apply double standards by requiring a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, denying Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor, using symbols or images associated with classic anti-Semitism. This is the one that caught my eye. Claims of Jews killing Jesus or blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis. and then drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of Nazis, which of course that last one, you're like, yeah, that when I see that from these pro-Palestinian whatever, and they're like calling Israel, I'm like, that is wild to me. These leftist neo-Marxists will typically do this. They'll accuse people of all sorts of wild things. And this has always been a communist part of the communist playbook, is to slap labels that most of the population finds disgusting on certain groups in order to gin up hatred for them. But the thing that caught my eye was the claims of Jews killing Jesus. Uh, I'm like, that's like, we have Bible verses. Like, so are we now not allowed to talk about First Thessalonians 2:14 through 15, Acts 2:22 to 23, Matthew 27:22 to 23. So it's like, it's a very all-encompassing thing. And it's also, I just found it highly ironic that they're very eager to pass this, and I understand a lot of the sentiment as to why they're trying to, stamp out this stuff on campus. I don't think it's the right strategy to do that, but it's strange to me that we, as a historically Christian nation, are so willing to go to the mat for Judaism, and yet we're unable to kind of articulate a defense of Christianity itself. Uh, so
Right.
it's very just strange. It's ironic to me because even a great thinker like Jerome Hazoni, who I've had on my podcast, and we know, would say that America is a Christian nation. America should, stand up for itself, and it would be great for America to be Protestant and Christian again. And it's just very odd. So that's kind of what some of the bill entails.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, and I think that would be an interesting thing to hear Dr. Hazoni's perspective, because he has, said very, very consistently that the United States needs to return not so much to Judaism, but to its Protestant history as a way of providing the level of freedom that Jews can enjoy. And so that's an interesting. I'd be curious to hear his perspective on that. My own take, when you consider the that last clause that you read there, I mean, the entire thing is shaped in a way that it formed in a way that you can begin to, if this enters in the world of, let's say, if Congress or the government were to play the hermeneutical game, right? If they begin to read our statements and all these things, we could probably violate quite a few of those. And for my own perspective, you added several Bible passages. I would add Acts chapter 4, 27 and 28 as, at the very least, I'd say advocating a form of corporate guilt, not just of Jews, but also of Gentiles too, the Romans, Herod, and so on. But I think all these things ought to play a role in this conversation here. So if we can't offer a biblical rationale for the crucifixion of Jesus, where the Bible speaks very clearly, had the hands of Jewish people, others as well, but hands of Jewish people, then we're violating our Christian commitment and loyalty as ministers of the gospel and as citizens in the kingdom of God. One of the concerns I've had, Chase, I think with this issue here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is I think there are deep concerns that you and I would agree with, and the language of anti-Semitism is so, it's maybe 200 years old, something very fresh of that nature. I understand what the sentiment behind it is, right? It's the idea that everything that happens in the United States that's evil at a political level or a sociological or moral ethical level has at its top some form of a Jewish conspiracy against Christians per se. And so there are concerns at an ecclesiastical level, concerns at a political level. I have concerns that what this bill will do, is it will remove the genuine concerns and in its place give us false concerns, or give us pseudo concerns. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think one thing, it's actually funny, when I talked to Doug Wilson about this topic, when a bill like this passes, what do you think those people who are very into those kind of conversations and theories of who runs the world, that kind of thing, all this does is play right into their hand and only inflame more rhetoric. And Doug's sentiment on the podcast, he expresses, you have to be willing to answer them biblically and faithfully and theologically from church history. You have to be able to address people's concerns and hear them out. And as soon as you pass a bill like this, I mean, you just look through it. I'm looking at more of it. Um, accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, or even for acts committed by non-Jews. And so, like when you pass that law, the people who are that way, that's going to inflame their passions. And so, it's one of those things pastorally where you have to be able to teach people theologically. And this is why I've really appreciated the work you do and Doug does on eschatology and understanding kind of partial preterism, and understanding the relationship of the Jewish people to the Christian church. And obviously with dispensationals, that gets really messy. I think Doug was on Charlie Kirk's show recently talking about that, and I found that really edifying. And so I think Christians just need to be better educated on how we're to think about different religions. That's one category, whether it's Hinduism and bolder, it's Buddhism is kind of a big one, even though it's an American kind of like they've culturally appropriated Buddhism for yoga purposes,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, Islam or even Judaism. And so then you have to, from that conversation, then you get in down to, okay, well, what relationship should Christians have with different relations? And you could even boil that down to, the way the reformers talked about the Catholic Church. Okay, well, how should we think about the Catholic Church? And so these are conversations that are extremely pastoral, helpful. We can pull from church history. I think a lot of people, like for example, with the Catholics, a lot of people today in circles that I've run in are very uncomfortable with how the reformers talked about the Pope being the Antichrist and all this kind of stuff. And I'm more like, well, like let's understand their context. Let's understand why they were that way. And so I just think this makes our job harder when it
Yeah.
comes to pastoring people who are struggling with understanding the world as they see the world unraveling, as they see these campus uprisings, and then you pass a bill like this, it makes our job harder.
It does make our job harder, and I think it exacerbates already the skepticism that a lot of people on X already have on these issues. And even we've had this conversation that became a little bit of a viral sensation. I think what it does is it adds a few more thousands or millions of anonymous accounts there, because now their concerns have really been vindicated. And
Right.
so they're going to become so they're going to take their whatever DEF CON level is to its extreme area. And we also know that the discipleship functions in a way that builds upon the foundation positively or negatively, meaning that whoever these guys are, if let's say they're moderate in their hatred of the Jewish people in general, their disciples, namely their children of those they're training, will take this to a whole new level. So there's a concern here that we deal with these issues pastorally, not for the sake of tomorrow, but for the sake of what 40 years down the road may bring.
Yeah, and I think one thing I noticed here is like even during COVID or BLM or all this stuff, I noticed an inability for a lot of pastors to actually like have these conversations with people. I heard from pastors all the time about these radical Trumpists, these radical Trumpists. They come into my church and they cause all this dysfunction, and then they basically camp everyone that's a Trumpist with QAnon conspiracies and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, could I just meet one? I'd like to just like try to disciple them, because I don't get those very often in Boulder, Colorado. I don't see them, but like I just like people have a lot of questions and people are really suspicious. And we have the word of God. We have the truth revealed in God's word, and we should be able to like go at these things, have hard conversations about these topics if we need to. And I notice the same thing here is like there should be a willingness from as pastors to go like, let's get into your questions, let's get into the accusations, and let's figure out how we can kind of walk you back. Because I'm sure I don't have a family member like this, but I've heard stories. Apparently, there's family members that have fallen into conspiracy theories, all this stuff. And I'm like, I think these are opportunities for discipleship and maturity. And like you said, if we don't deal with it in a biblical way, it'll only inflame it generations down and won't be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's the issue of our day. I think pastorally is reorienting passions. It's reorienting the order of our loves. Chase, such a joy to talk to you again, my brother. Always enjoy having these back and forth cultural, theological conversations with you. Thanks for your labors in Boulder, Colorado, and the Lord bless you. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you so much.